Welcome to yet another episode of Nerds at Night. This is our fourth episode now, and we'd like to welcome back all our regular listeners and, of course, our new ones as well. As always, I'm your host, Tolly, and we've got our guest nerd with us back again, Scuzzy. Welcome to the show, Scuzz.
G'day, mate. How are you? Hello, listeners.
I'm doing alright, except I'm recording a podcast, so it could be better.
Yeah, it's a pretty late one since we couldn't meet our normal time. But this is it's still good to be online and talking about nerdy stuff. So
That's right. We've got a few more tech topics tonight because I promise every week that we'll stop talking about games, even though I'm sure we'll find a way to slide it in there somewhere. We're going to be talking about social media and to a better extent, privacy. And in the interest of disclosure before we get into it, I don't have Facebook. I used to, and then I turned against it like a hating son of a bitch. What about you, Scuzz?
yeah, I've got a Facebook account.
You're the worst person ever.
Well, it's just with life the way it is, hectic and stuff like that. It's a good way to keep in contact with people and use it to organise gatherings and so on. It's I don't mind it at all.
Non-lethal's always telling me I don't have friends, so maybe that's why I don't find a use for it.
There's only so many times you can look at it and see the fact that you've got 0 friends before you decide to turn it off, I guess.
That's true. Just reading my own status updates just seems a bit narcissistic, I guess.
I was literally just about to look up your old account to see what was on it.
Oh God, I don't want to know. All right, we'll move on from that. So we'll jump straight into it. Considering you actually have a Facebook account, we'll eventually get into the reasons why I don't. Do you feel that the things you put on Facebook are quote unquote private?
I never put anything on Facebook that I consider private.
That's probably wise. All right, go on then and tell me why.
Well, the simple fact of the matter is, regardless of what privacy settings you set, nothing is actually private. I mean, a lot of people forget that Facebook is a multi-billion-dollar company, and very few have actually read their usage agreement. Effectively, they can do anything they want with the data that you actually post.
Yeah, well, that's right, and that's a lot of the issue I took with it when I was on there is or any of my friends can post up an image and then it's on there, and as you and I know, being in the tech industry, that once it's out there, there's no deleting it. It gets indexed by Google and all the other search engines, and then it's just spread across the web like a virus. That ugly picture of you throwing up after a night out in the town and all that sort of business. So it can definitely become something very public out of something very private very quickly and very easily.
But it's not even that. Like the whole era of smartphones, the fact that they've even got still cameras now, standalone cameras with inbuilt GPSs, which actually tag the location, date, and time into the metadata of the file that you're then uploading to Facebook. So anyone that knows what they're doing, that has access to that, can effectively build aggregate that metadata together to actually track where you've been.
It scared the crap out of me the first time that ever happened to me. I sent a photo to a friend of just somewhere I happened to be. It was just a photo of a beach, and I happened to be about one state out of town. And they got the GPS coordinates. They looked it up and they said, "Oh, that's a beautiful beach right there in Eden." And I've just gone, "Sweet Jesus, how did you know that I'm here?" And then eventually connected the dots and realised that just that photo I've shared with one friend, or that I could have chucked up on Facebook, and it's given a pretty close and accurate representation of where I am. And if I had have sent photos all the way along, it would have tracked my entire journey, which isn't something I particularly wanted to share because I was just out on a quiet trip alone and I just wanted to share that one picture. But it's just interesting how much metadata we can even put up on there without even knowing about it.
Well, I think it's more a case of, are you willing to accept the risk? I remember it was probably you I was arguing with many, many years ago about whether to Facebook or not to Facebook. And at the time, I was involved in some fairly heated discussions online about it. And it's just more the point that back in those days, people were, up in arms about how much information they do or don't put on the internet, and yet they're willing to basically give someone at the counter at a video rental store like a Blockbuster or something similar their phone number, their their home address, 3 forms of identification and so on, yet they're not happy enough to actually just put an email address, a username and password on an online site. Like, it's horses for courses. Yes, you are accepting a risk by using a service like that, but it depends on how you use it and whether or not you're willing to take measures to limit your exposure as a result.
That's a pretty good point that you've just brought up there. How often you'll give information out to complete strangers who are in a position of power if they're collecting all these copies of ID and things like that off you, and you don't know these people from a bar of soap, as opposed to, at least on Facebook, you've, for most people, handpicked who this is going to, and at least, even in worst case scenario, sometimes it will only be friends of friends. So the chances of the data getting out to a complete stranger in that context is relatively low, as opposed to someone at work who I've only just met said, "Hey, what's your phone number, and we'll get in touch." And I'm like, "No, I don't really know you, mate."
Yeah, it's, I guess, like all things, social engineering is always the biggest or easiest way for people to attack or glean information. And that's why we get so many phone calls from these call centers saying, I'm calling from the security center at Microsoft and there's a problem with your computer type stuff around 6 o'clock at night.
You should knock those guys. They're pretty helpful.
It's the weak point has always been the meat puppet that's operating the machine. In recent IT, probably in the last decade. In the 90s, it was very much security by obscurity online, whereas obviously cryptography has come a long way.
Yeah, I read some research recently, and I won't go into it too much, where a study was done that most people would give up their passwords for just a few dollars. So you could go to a website and they'll blatantly tell you that they want you to put in your most commonly used password, and this website in return will give you $1.73 to spend on whatever you like. And some alarming number of people actually went, yeah, you know what, that's fine. What are they going to do with my password anyway? I'll just type it in, and then I got my $2 winning.
I'd be down with that, providing I changed all my passwords first.
That's true. You could just keep doing it over and over again.
Mate, I'd write a script that did it over and over again. It'd be fine.
Maybe that's why it was such a success. Somebody figured it out and was just script kidding the bloody research.
I just download an online password dictionary and just feed it in one thing at a time.
Just a rainbow table and just brute force their system.
Yeah, pretty much.
But it was interesting that you mentioned just a while back that with the terms and conditions you essentially agree to when you sign up to Facebook, assuming that you're actually old enough to consent to such a thing, is that Facebook can really do whatever they like. And it seems like in the news lately they've been exercising that power as they pleased by, without trying to give it too many connotations, experimenting on users.
Yeah, they've always said that they could use the data for their own internal research purposes, but they also have in it that they can actually share it with external parties for research purposes as well, third parties. Because the actual university that they shared it with has come under fire for actually having compiled the data.
Yeah, the problem I take with that is the term research can be used somewhat loosely, and can you take us through what the actual research was? You'll probably explain it better than I will.
Alright, so the short version is just shy of 690,000 users. What they were doing was altered the algorithm and showed either positive or negative emotional posts from their friends. So effectively what they do is that they at random select, and it was completely at random, that 690,000 users, and they choose that user to see a positive wall and the next user to see a negative wall, and they'd filter the posts of their friends in their feed so that it was either positive or negative. Then they'd record the posts over that time to see whether or not they were positive or negative, more so as opposed to their historic posts, to see whether or not they could by the experience of what that user was seeing effectively affect their emotional state.
That's all very interesting. The way I read that, because I don't use Facebook, and I'm sure I'd feel some kind of outrage if I did, is who cares if you have some negative and some positive posts on your feed, and they were just filtering it so you see all the miserable pricks that are your friends instead of the sunshine and rainbow people. One, wouldn't you notice? And two, if all you're doing is hearing them whinge or post negative things, shouldn't you go and kick that friend in the ass and tell them to cheer up anyway?
Well, I mean, a lot of this strikes at sort of, the social fabric that exists in the developed world, I guess, as far as, how people, will react. But it's more a point that they were effectively trying to affect someone's emotional state rather than trying to collect the data and analyze it. It was an experiment. It wasn't just research. And I guess that's where the outrage has come from, is that a lot of Facebook users feel like they were effectively a guinea pig.
Yeah, I can understand that in the sense that, they've ultimately affected how these people might feel. And I can understand, as someone who's had trouble with a mental illness before, how that might affect you personally if you're already feeling somewhat depressed, or you have problems with periods of mania where you're hyper excited or things like that. Facebook exacerbating that problem might become an issue. I suppose the problem is, in terms of they may have breached what some people might feel your privacy by reaching into your feed and tinkering with it. But is there privacy the other way, in that we can see the extent of what they changed and how much they might have altered it? Like, we don't know if they just made the feed slightly more negative, or they put someone who may have already been in a depressive state into borderline suicide.
I don't think that'll ever be publicly known. There's been a series of investigations that have been launched into it, but whether or not we see anything meaningful out of it. But I mean, part of the issue that I take with it personally is that some people aren't getting upset about it, but you've got to look at, what Facebook actually means to some people. The fact that, technology is effectively, well, in my view, an extension of, our race. It's a way of, well, take this by example. Genetic evolution effectively stopped the moment that our species developed language. And effectively what we started doing is a way of evolving. We evolved through technology. So in effect, the technology and these systems that we're putting in place are actually an extension of ourselves. So it's not like you're experimenting on some random system. A lot of users, it's an extension of their self, an extension of their persona. I think it's quite a fairly serious violation, to be honest.
I think with how much Facebook has integrated into some people's lives and how much they live inside Facebook to a lot of people. I mean, I have a lot of friends who are on the bloody thing every second of every day. And I suppose, as you suggest, if it is an extension of them and their life is so entwined with what they're reading on Facebook, and I know some people, the only way they get their news about anything, be it their friends or the world at large, is through Facebook. So I suppose I can take the point on board that perhaps by messing with that in any way, whether it be positive or negative, you're ultimately changing the chemistry of someone's brain and how they're perceiving the world around them, not necessarily within their social circle, but as a whole.
Well, not only that, but they're potentially changing the, other people's perception of yourself as a Facebook user as well.
That's a good point. I mean, if you happen to just post negative things because say it's just your choice that whenever you go on Facebook, you're just going on there to have a bit of a whinge and say, oh, I had a lousy day because my boss is a jerk or whatever. And yeah, Facebook has chosen, say, your friends by some random instance, 3 out of 10 of your friends are only seeing the posts where you have a whinge instead of, oh, I totally had a great day today, everything is awesome, everything is cool and you're part of a team. Then yeah, they are affecting the way you're seen by the outside world, and that can ultimately have real world ramifications where perhaps it's affecting your friendships, your relationships, or even your professional relationships, where you have your colleagues perhaps viewing you differently because the only time they ever see a post of yours on your feed is because it's something negative.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see to the extent or whether it got revealed exactly what the algorithm they used was. I don't think we'll ever see it, but I mean, the scientific part of me thinks it would be interesting to see exactly what the results were and whether or not they'll be made public. Would be, and the degree of them that we'll actually see. It'd be interesting to see how it affected the users that were that unwittingly took part in it.
What's part of the issue, I guess, is that I say us, including myself and the Facebook user group, even though I'm not, were wide open to Facebook. There was no necessarily privacy kept for us in terms of what we saw or didn't see, but Facebook is holding all the cards in terms of the research, and as you said, I don't think we'll ever publicly see exactly what they did or how it affected people in its entirety. So is that a double standard in terms of what we think of as privacy?
Well, again, it comes down to whether or not you view what you're putting on Facebook as public or private. I think anyone that treats it as private information is deluding themselves. So it's more the issue is that data set is why Facebook is a multi-billion-dollar company. It's effectively their intellectual property, and I doubt very highly whether or not we'll see any of it. Interestingly enough, when you read the news reports and the press releases from Facebook, they mention, fairly clearly that Cornell University processed the data that was collected. I dare say that they processed that data, handed that back to Facebook, and it'll never be seen again.
Well, that's true, but by that measure, that means that university would have had access, presumably, to the raw data at hand, wouldn't they?
Yeah, you would think, but I would imagine there'd be some fairly stringent agreements in place.
Well, even if there was, if they've just handed over raw information that may or may not include status updates of a personal or private nature, that information is still being shared around with different organisations. Now, granted, you've agreed to this in the terms and conditions when you signed up, but essentially you've posted something potentially traumatic on Facebook. Oh, do you know Susie, she just had a miscarriage, and you've just said that to your close friends that you've got on Facebook, and now that's in the hands of this university and graduates and potentially people who haven't gone through the same checks that perhaps employees at Facebook would have in terms of keeping that information private.
Yeah, exactly. And not only that, but this is only coming to light now, and this was an experiment that took place in 2012. So, almost 2 years on from the event and only finding out about it now.
Yeah, we're arguing about this years after the fact, and we don't... This is just the research we've heard about. I'm sure there are other studies going on even as we speak that may not be released to the public, or something they'll keep internally or just sell off privately, as is their right under the agreement made upon signing up to the service, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of people which are making noise about saying that it should have been an opt-in. We should have the ability to opt out, and Facebook's user agreement's fairly explicit in the fact that it's not an optional thing, and any services where they do have an opt-out, it'll be opt-in by default. That's fairly plain for the eye to see.
That's the unfortunate thing about it, is if there is someone who may be psychologically or emotionally unstable who wants or needs to use Facebook in terms to manage their relationships or keep in touch with, relatives that are miles away, don't have any way to opt out of something which may have a significant impact on their mental state, which kind of really makes Facebook jerks.
Yeah, to put things in perspective, though, we are talking about something that only took place over 1 week, so it's not like they were doing this for months at a time.
I would argue and say that may be true for this particular study, but there may be other studies that are longer term.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt in my mind that there'd be more than that actually going on, but it's I think this is the first instance that's been revealed public where they've actually been manipulating what's actually been displayed.
True. I think in fairness, we shouldn't necessarily, and I don't want to defend them, we shouldn't necessarily be bagging out Facebook as saying they've done something horrible and unthinkable, in the sense that I'm sure LinkedIn and Google now and even perhaps MySpace back in the day all would have done this kind of thing, whether it was just gathering metadata or altering things here or there just to see how this impacts people and using this research to whatever benefit they could.
Well, I think it's more so Facebook trying to find ways that they can make a dollar outside of advertising as well, because the more data they can collect and the more that they can understand. Because there is speculation that this was partially funded by the US government.
Well, information is their currency. It's all that they really have to trade on in terms of what's now a publicly listed company, and they need to make money to stay afloat. I'm sure those servers that they've got are quite expensive to run, and with advertising it only goes so far. Even with all the profiling and targeted advertising they do, it will only go so far to cover the costs. So the only other currency they've got to trade in is people's information and metadata.
Yeah, well, I mean, I for one don't have any issues with targeted advertising. If they're going to waste screen real estate on advertising, it should at least be relevant to my interests.
The problem I have with targeted advertising, without trying to derail this, is I'll go online and look up something that I may be interested in purchasing, and then I'll purchase it an hour later, and then that's all the advertising I will get for the next 3 months. It's like, that's nice that you're showing me that awesome gaming mouse, but I just bought one. How about showing me keyboards?
Yeah, I mean, that's got to do with the algorithms and things like that. But again, that's probably got to do with privacy laws are in place about not sharing purchases as well.
Well, that's probably a good point. Although the tinfoil hat part of me suspects that they probably already know what I purchase and where I purchase it from and all that sort of nonsense. But I suppose it depends on the individual person how much that bothers you. I know for some people it doesn't matter. These companies can have all the metadata on you that they want. How does it really affect me personally that Google knows that I like to go online and buy up gaming paraphernalia? What does it matter?
I guess it all comes down to who you're willing to have that information and what information. I mean, could you imagine if that type of information was actually revealed to the likes of government from a standpoint of being able to plan for what the populace of any one given country actually requires?
That would be an interesting scenario. It all depends with what faith the information is used, I suppose.
Yeah, well, I mean, if any of the recent polls are anything to go by, I think politicians are one of the least trusted professions.
Yeah, well, it's pretty hard to get around that. We'll try and avoid delving into the bollocks that is Australian politics. We'll move it forward a bit, and we'll take this a little bit wider in the time that we've got left quickly. In terms of online security and you brought it up, government surveillance. So privacy as a whole, even outside social media, do you reckon it even exists? Things that I've posted on private sites, even private at all?
No, definitely not. Definitely not. Not even remotely close to being private.
So that forum that I'm on, telling people about, all these illegal things that I've done and all these horrible crimes I've committed and where I've hidden the bodies, Do you think either Facebook or the government know about that?
Whether Facebook or our government knows about it, and I'm not sure, but it's I mean, take for example, and I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, the NSA over in the US, they effectively split all the data connections as they come into the US, in all the AT&T points of presence. So they physically have a prism where the fibre comes in. One gets routed into AT&T, the other one goes into a secure floor where or only AT&T NSA certified staff can actually gain access to. They've just completed last year building a data center purely used for mining this data and code breaking in Utah. That's just shy of 200,000 square meters that is used for mining this stuff. They're storing something in excess of about 12 exabytes of data, and they require 65 megawatts of electricity to be able to power this thing. Like, the type of computing ability that they've got, they could code break anything on the planet if they wanted to. I think whatever data they want to get, they will get access to. It's just more a point of, if you're not a terrorist and you're not a criminal, what do you actually have to fear?
Well, that's a question a lot of people ask, and I mean, in terms of me, do I need to be worried that the NSA knows where the bodies are in terms of me? And how much do they care about small-time criminals? I'm sure with the data they've got, they could track down, every drug dealer in the United States or every illegal immigrant or something like that. But how much do they care in terms of their directive?
Well, I think it's not so much directive. I think it's more so got to do with how much money they've got and how much the law enforcement agencies have actually got. Because in the grand scheme of things, if you're a petty thief or whatever, compared to, people which are potentially trying to, fly airplanes into buildings, it's, you're a small fish, and it's all about what's the most efficient way that they can spend that money to protect quote unquote national interest.
Yeah, well, when you've got to triage a limited budget, I suppose you only go after the criminals that are going to secure your funding for the next quarter or what have you. Considering I'm sure their budget wouldn't be unlimited, and with not all of the data they're collecting being above board, they have to be very careful how they use it in terms of doing what they need to do.
Yeah, look, there are laws and things which are in place that protect the interests of individuals to some extent, but I guess the loophole in the American law is around the fact that it's worded in such a way so it's open to the subjectivity of the analyst, which is involved. But to put things in perspective, it's not like they're effectively going through every single email and phone call that's ever been made. It's more a point of there's got to be a reason for that analyst to actually dig in, to be able to then go through it. They're mining it to be able to go back for historic reasons to some extent.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, obviously there isn't some analyst sitting in some dark basement of some NSA headquarters somewhere who's thinking, "Oh no, I'll look up this guy Tolly and see what sort of shenanigans he's been up to, and find out the coordinates of where I've hidden the bodies, or the fact that I got Game of Thrones episode 10 from the Pirate Bay or whatever," and then sending government agents across the sea to kick in my door and handcuff me and all that sort of nonsense.
Yeah, look, I think part of the problem is if these were government employees directly, it would be okay. But effectively, this entire intelligence industry has evolved where, that function is effectively being outsourced. So there's some, I guess, conjecture around, whether or not these companies have got best the nation's best interests at heart.
Or the nation's best employees, for that matter. We won't dig into it too much, but I mean, we've all heard about Edward Snowden and the chaos that one contractor can cause if they feel they need to whistleblow, or alternatively, in the event that they just want to have that information to jerk people around, they can definitely get access to it through the access they've been granted through their parent company via the government, I suppose.
Yeah. I, for one, welcome our internet overlords.
That's right. This is where the companies begin taking over and destroying governments, and then none of us have any privacy ever again. Oh wait,
I'm not sure we've got any privacy now, but anyway.
Well, I think that's the bottom line, and where we'll wrap up this part of the discussion is that essentially, if you're putting something online, it's not private. If you're posting a link to a friend, it's not private. Somebody somewhere has a record of it, whether it be the evil government overlords or whether it's Google tracking your search history through, your device that you logged on through or anything like that. It's essentially, if it's online, you may as well be shouting it outside.
Yeah, I mean, that's entirely right. I mean, there's simple things that people can do to, help mitigate the amount of data that they're uploading and the types of data they're uploading, like turning off location services on your iPhone, on your camera, actually looking at the prompts that come up for what you're allowing apps access to, not using the same password for everything online. Something as simple as for instance, I don't use my real date of birth on online services for security questions, or my mother's real maiden name. I make one up. I use the same made up answer for certain security questions online, but I'm the only person that knows what I've actually put in, as opposed to be, someone that's potentially breached a system, from the government that's actually got my actual date of birth, can't use that to flow on and gain access to other online services.
Those are some fair points, and it definitely helps in terms of real life and identity theft if you actually take some steps while we're still given the privilege of the option of opting out of some of these things, or setting what we want to be public, such as the location, metadata on a photograph we take. So I think, that's some pretty wise advice around why we still have the options. We should take steps to preserve our privacy, of course, only if you want to. It's still a choice in this day and age.
Well, I think you've hit the nail right on the head, and you've chosen an appropriate word. It's about choice.
The problem is choice, Neo.
Exactly. But the whole thing is with it, though, is that you've got to choose to give up that information for a service, but then what are you gaining in return? The old saying, you don't get something for nothing, I think is true in this instance, as it is in most instances. If you want the ability to be able to easily connect and share things with your friends, and be able to use that facility to, organise birthday parties or LAN parties or whatever, they're expecting something in return, and in Facebook's instance, that is, some of your personal information. So if you're willing to forego privacy in order to gain that functionality, then it's your choice.
Yeah, and my final piece of advice before I take off my tinfoil hat and launch into our last little topic for this evening is it's something that sounds very conspiracy oriented, and it probably is that essentially, if you're using a service for free, or it's not a product, then often you are the product or your information.
Yeah, I mean, it just really boils my blood and pisses me off that people that use Facebook rant about it. If you don't like it, don't use it.
That's exactly it, and I think that's where we'll leave that topic, with that very, very solid point. If you don't like it, don't use it. But just to touch a little bit more, we'll flick over back to gaming. Those of you who listened in last week that'll know we waffled on about the Steam Summer Sale for a bit, because we love our games here. What did you buy in the Summer Sale, Scuzz?
Yeah, look, I was quite reserved this year. I ended up voting in practically every vote, and as a result sold all those badges early on when they were worth about 50 cents a pop, and bought a couple of games for nothing, which was awesome.
You bastard, that's where all my money went.
So I ended up getting... I bought every Bioshock thing that I didn't have, so I only had Infinite, so I went back and bought Bioshock 1 and 2 to play. I also bought the season pass for Infinite, so that I can go in and play the extra DLC, which I'm really keen to do because I think Bioshock's one of the best shooters I've played in at least 10 years. I also went a bit old school and bought Baldur's Gate 2 Enhanced Edition as well. So,
that's showing your age there, mate.
I reckon it's the best RPG that's ever been made.
People have said that, but I look at the trailers and I'm just not seeing it. Maybe it's because I was born in the ADD generation, but I don't feel it.
Yeah, look, it's funny you should say AD&D because it's actually based off Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. But it's back when I was younger, I used to play a bit of D&D, and I think that's what attracted me to the game, as it was a way to be able to get the AD&D fix when friends were interstate or I couldn't get back to play. So
terrible advice.
What about you?
Anyway, I mostly bought indie games, which is strange. I actually had to look this up before the show because, as I suggested last week, I'm either have Alzheimer's or I just don't care enough anymore, and I have no idea what I bought in the sale. But I went and looked it up.
Or you have too much disposable income.
Well, that's right. I'm feeling very middle class right now, where I can just empty my wallet into Steam on pointless virtual currency or indie games that I will never play. So, to cut all that long story short, I bought the 20th anniversary edition of Another World, which wasn't an indie game, but was recommended to me as one of the best games ever made. And I played through it. It took me all of an hour and a half and a walk through and a lot of keyboard mashing, and I can safely say that game's a pile of crap.
You see, that game holds a fairly nice, loving place in my heart, because this is showing the difference in our ages, as I actually played that when it first came out originally. And back in those days, it was a bit of a shift. It was a bit different. Everyone was playing sort of Doom and Descent and things, and Rise of the Triad back then. And it was probably the first, I guess, game that they actually bothered to, where the story came first and everything else followed. So, yeah, definitely really love that game. By today's standards, it's probably a bit lacking and certainly doesn't have what I'd call replayability. But definitely a cool game and a very influential game historically.
Absolute garbage in my opinion. Trying to play through the thing, and it's like, I don't know what's happening. No, there hasn't been an explosion for 5 minutes. Where's my Call of Duty? But I also bought Siberia, which I kind of remember looking at the information for, and it sounded interesting at the time. It's like, yeah, I'll totally play that, and now a week later I don't even know what it is. So we'll move on from that. I also bought Audio Surf, which is another one of those cool little games where you play a game to your backing track of music, so all my crazy speed metal I can play a game to now. I bought Broken Age, another Kickstarter-funded adventure game, because adventure games are the bomb. And I bought the Stanley Parable, which is another game that people have told me is the greatest game ever created, so I'm kind of hoping it doesn't let me down like Another World did.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, over recent sort of history, I would have been right into 10 years ago the indie scene if it existed back then, and nowadays I basically only play AAA titles because it's the only time that I get nowadays is fairly limited to actually sink into games, and trying to deal with bugs or something that's not necessarily up to scratch, I just don't have the patience for anymore.
I'm the same. Risk reward when it comes to indie games is just it's tending a little too far towards risk than reward. It's so hard to find a gem amongst just the ocean of turds out there that it's just not worth finding the time to give a game a go unless someone has recommended it to you whose opinion you actually trust.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same. Like, that being said, like, FTL is a game that I've sunk probably hundreds of hours into. I absolutely love it, but the only reason that I even started playing it is that Steam recommended it to me as something that I might like, and then I went and asked friends that I'd sort of bought it, what's this like, what games I like, would I enjoy it? Once I started getting some recommendations from friends, that's when I decided to actually purchase it and have a go, and was actually sweetly surprised.
This is Steam using your Facebook metadata to determine what sort of games you play. They're controlling you, man.
Hey, like I said, quite happy for them to target me with advertising as long as they actually send something to me which is relevant.
This is how it all begins, mate. Acceptance. Then they rule the world.
I don't think they need your acceptance. That's the whole point. But anyway, we won't delve back into it in the interest of time.
That's a fair call. I think at that point we'll wrap up today's show. I hope everyone enjoyed episode 4 of Nerds at Night. As always, sign up and subscribe to us on iTunes. You can get the episode every week. I'm sure we'll be doing this for a long time yet, considering we struggle to fit in time as it is now. Also, follow us on Twitter and Facebook and all that other sort of social media so the government and the NSA can get a hold of your information. Also, thanks again, Scuzz, for being on the show.
A pleasure, mate, and glad to any time.
I'm sure we'll have you back again in the very near future. For those of you that have been hanging out for it, we'll have Non-Lethal back next week. He's finished being an antisocial git, so we'll have him. We'll definitely be mixing it up in the future. We'll have a few more guest nerds. We'll definitely have Scuzzy back. But in the meantime, thanks for listening. I've been Tolly.
And I'm Scuzzy.
Good night.